This is Seraj Bharwani. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of AcuityAds, a Canadian publicly owned company that invented illumin, the first omni-channel journey automation platform in the ad tech industry. I came here through an acquisition about 5 years ago, and I sold my company and came into this role for the company as the public face for the brand.
Great stuff. Great to have you with us, Seraj. A fine public face to choose. Great to have you with us. And Julia, let's go to you as well.
Sure. Well, I really kind of wanted to stop once I got the wonderful Julia Fitzjerald. I've never had that good of an introduction, so I'd be really good to just leave it right there. But just a little bit more. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the American Lung Association, and I'm also on the Executive Leadership Committee there as well. So I've been there for about 2.5 years, and at American Lung Association, I'm in charge of the branding, the communications, and the digital marketing. So that has been quite a journey. I'm a newbie to not-for-profit. I've only been there 2.5 years, and I've really built my career as a CMO at retail and consumer goods and really portfolio companies for private equity. So being in the not-for-profit space where the product is saving lives has been a new step and very rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, a fascinating journey I am sure you've been on personally throughout the last 18 months, given the mandate and the mission of the American Lung Association. Perhaps we can just kick things off by maybe providing a little bit more context around that for us. I think you've just got a couple of slides that maybe we can bring up as well.
Sure, and they're super simple slides. If we want to roll the first one, it really just shares our vision, and it's a vision to have a world free of lung disease. We make no small plans. So we try to achieve this through advocacy, education, and of course, research. And let's go to the next slide. We really go about this mission through 4 different strategic imperatives. And if you can hit the next slide, it'll be a nice visual to support. So again, making no small plans. The first one is to defeat lung cancer. The second is to champion clean air for all. American Lung Association has been behind the Clean Air Act. So we go back decades, starting there and, fighting for climate change rules and regulations right now. Our third is really create a tobacco-free future. Youth vaping is a very clear and present issue for us in this strategic imperative. And the last one is really to help everybody who is battling with any type of lung disease. And COVID has been the one kind of front and foremost this whole year. So we can go ahead and wrap up with the slides. I think that really describes what American Lung Association does. And listening to Scott, and he was talking about product, I was just thinking COVID was the new product that nobody ever wanted. And being the trusted champion of lung disease and help for people dealing with lung disease, COVID took over our world last year as it did for many others. So that's kind of the short story of what American Lung is all about and what we've been doing over the last 18 months.
Yeah, wonderful. Many thanks, Julia. Well, maybe you can just sort of provide just a degree of extra granularity on some of that context. How were you traditionally pursuing that mandate and that mission? What were you traditionally looking at in terms of marketing?
Well, with our marketing, we really have 2 things that we have to accomplish. One is to get the mission into the hands of the people who need it. For the 37 million people who are dealing with lung disease, or all of Americans who need clean air, information, advocacy. The other side is to raise funds to make this mission possible. So we do that through a lot of in-person fundraising events, climbs, walks, galas. And we also have a lot of things where we go in person to teach people how to stop smoking, to teach healthcare providers how to help patients with asthma. So traditionally, there was a lot of in-person. And I'm sure everyone right now is just kind of thinking through their heads what the last 18 months has been like. And the fact that in-person very quickly became not an option. and especially for people who were suffering with lung disease in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think very much one of the words of the last 18 months has been this idea of pivot or transform, whichever one you want to pick. So I guess you've been forced into a pivot. So how did you get started on that initiative? We'll get some thoughts from you, Julia, and then I'll maybe bring in Seraj as well.
Well, I'm going to start at a spot where I can hand it over to Seraj very neatly. Even before COVID, we had, as everybody did, like an agenda. And what we had realized is American Lung Association had very little digital fundraising. We had requests through email and we had requests through direct mail. And we realized that we need to get better at this. So before COVID was even on our agenda, we reached out to Seraj to help us figure out how we could do this in a very systematic way. And Seraj, I'm going to toss it to you so you can tell this part of the story.
Yeah. Is that okay if I jump in?
Of course it is, Seraj. Yeah, you go for it.
All right. Thank you. It's a delight, by the way, to be here. I'm very excited to be here. We've been participating with GDS for over 5 years now. It's an amazing audience, and the learnings that we gained, we felt was the right place to really bring this together with Julia and the things that we've learned. First of all, American Lung, as Julia described it, is just an amazing, amazing mandate that it has. And there are many ways for the brand to engage with the target consumer, which is broad, with broad interests. And they go through many stages of that engagement the way it happens. It could be that they like what American Lung researches on. It could be that they like the way they advocate and the work they do in terms of pushing for regulations or other aspects of their mandate that they are promoting out there. It could also be in the way they really do the events and how people could participate in those events. And funding part of it and donating to the cause could fit at any stage of that relationship. And I think it's a very systematic approach that is required in the way you approach it. And frankly, we had some experience at Acuity even before then, working with other nonprofits and other aspects, whether it's cancer or other things. And so working with Julia and having that dialogue and that interaction, given that she and I go back a few years, was very interesting. I just enjoy working with Julia. She's just very thought-provoking. And so we just had a great time thinking about what could we be doing. The seminal moment and the catalyst actually came on a March 2020 meeting in Chicago at the American Lung offices. Julia brought in Harold, who is the CEO of American Lung, in a forum. And that was my last in-person client meeting. It was the onset of COVID, and I never traveled after that. And in that meeting, Harold and Julia made it very, very clear, guys, we just cannot do in-person events. We have to figure out a digital alternative to this thing. And we've been talking about it for a while, but now we have to make it happen. How are we going to do that? And I think I give them credit for being proactive and thinking through about all of this thing. And I think we took it from there to think, how could we bring a media program and a channel and a communications program that could digitally at least provide a stopgap measure and hopefully have some promise in the future to build out the funding component of where American Lung could actually go. Julia, did I capture that appropriately?
I think you did. And it was an interesting time because there's kind of this feeling when crisis is coming to kind of hunker down a little bit. But when we looked at our reality, we didn't know where our fundraising was going to come from. So we had to take this idea that we're going to expand into new channels, and we had to just get on it and kind of push the fear aside. And I don't want to move off the topic of fear too quickly, because all of you CMOs out there have teams. And the other thing we had to realize at this time is our teams have gone from working in the office together to hunkering down at home and not knowing what was going on. So you have what you need to do as an organization, and how for us, our charge is to help America get through COVID. but we're also people who are figuring out, like, what are we doing? When do I go back? How long is this going to happen? So I think for a lot of us, we move too quickly over thinking about what our teams went through. And it also comes back to trust. Seraj mentioned that we had worked before together and that he had also worked with other not-for-profits. So both on a kind of a personal and professional level, there was some trust there. And when you get into these positions, you can't hunker down. You got to keep branching out. You got to work your way out of it. And so Harold and I decided, okay, let's work with Acuity. Let's keep pushing. Let's find new ways for fundraising to keep us afloat.
But I think there was one other thing you guys did that was very important. I think the expectations were set very, very clearly and very crisply in terms of what your ROI expectations were in terms of every dollar of investment. And so you were very calculated about the way you were taking the risks. And I think it isn't, and frankly, I've spent over 26 years now in marketing and in particular digital advertising. And I must tell you that not every story has a happy ending. There are many things that you learn in the process. And I would say that for every 10 programs that I have done, and I've done thousands of them, there are at least 3 that will just absolutely not work. There will be other 3 or 4 that will be somewhere mediocre. And then there will be the top 2 or 3 that will deliver amazingly great results. And so much of that is dependent on the client. And I tell you, I give credit to Julia for that, because there were moments when we were in that program where we frankly just weren't delivering the results that she was expecting from us. And I think that is the experience, Julia, you are better prepared to deliver on that because you knew what you were experiencing when we went through that process.
But being a not-for-profit, we are relentless about stewardship. We have to project to the world, like, how much of our income is spent on delivering the mission. And so it's, return on investment. And first of all, actually, I can't believe, Seraj, you invited me to come and do this, because the first part of our project together was disaster. Could we say disaster?
Yes, I think so.
The product that Seraj brought us in the platform was programmatic advertising. And the way that works, as you guys all probably know, is you let something run over time and optimize. It is machine learning. It's the algorithm. We all have our terms for it. But everything was changing. We had a partnership with CBS. We had Laura Dern coming in, and we had a contract and we had a program that was time limited. So we thought, hey, we're working with Acuity. Let's take this kind of opportunity with Laura Dern, urging people to donate to us or go into CBS and donate through the pen pad. And let's run that for the 2 months that we have. So Seraj is probably thinking, oh, Julia, but they did what we asked them to do as a partner. The return on investment was not there. We were not getting the money back that we were putting into it. And it could have just been like, game up, this is over with. So we were sitting there, about August or whatever, and like, this didn't work. But actually, Seraj's team came back and said, well, parts of it did work. Let's deconstruct this and see how it can work. What did we do wrong? Was it the product? Was it the strategy? Was it the platform? And very patiently, his team worked with my team, and we reworked it. And we started using the program as it was intended. And we ended up with about, where were we, Seraj? Like a 4x ROI?
That is correct, yes.
So we ended up in a good place, but it wasn't until after we had what at the time I was like, oh, no bueno, this did not work.
Yeah, and I think that's what the audience really needs to know. Marketing programs, when you are going to try new channels, new platforms, new ways of approaching, especially as I described, a consumer who relates with American Lung and ultimately decides to donate goes through a journey, and it requires guidance. It requires a procedural way to really reach them, remind them with the quality messages and so forth, things that are valuable to them, things that they would be able to understand and make decisions on. And that isn't something that happens like in a telethon that can all happen on a weekend or a week or 4 weeks, as Julia was describing. Then also the other limitations you have with big time events like that, when you have Laura Dern and the creative, the celebrities give you a very limited time window for the utilization of their name and their assets. And so what that limits is that if you're going to do continuity messaging, like a journey over weeks or months that it takes to convert somebody into making an American Lung contributor and a member, that is not really feasible. It doesn't work. And so we were able to come to that resolution working very closely with the American Lung team and figure out, like, you know what? We need to use the channel and the platform for the right reasons in the right way. And if you look at it, the improvements were substantial. I mean, it was a fascinating story. And I have to tell you, I think if the audience really wants to know what really did the job here, it was 4 things all total. And Julia, please contribute too, because, you know, I'm not an authority on everything that I learned from this thing and what I saw, but there are 4 things that I saw. 1, amazingly tight collaboration between the client team and the partner team in this case. That's true partnership, real collaboration, sitting down, dissecting things, thinking through what's working, what isn't working, extremely important. The commitment to test and learn. That is so essential here. Like, how else are you going to figure out how to make new channels work for you? You have to be in that discipline. Any experienced marketer will actually tell you that you have to do that. And yet I will tell you, you have no idea how many programs actually abort out there in the marketplace in the first 2 months, 3 months, if it doesn't really deliver the results. There are very limited like fuses on things these days that I've seen. Free flow of ideas, very, very important. And then I have to tell you, I give credit to both Harold and to Julia. Patience, the trust, all of that is so encouraging. I'm telling you, we are very motivated by American Lung's overall cause and what they're trying to do in the market. I came to the table and I said, guys, I care about this thing. That's why I want to do this. And I think we demonstrated that, and they gave us the time to do that. Yes, Julia, did I represent that accurately? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Seraj. I was just going to jump in with a follow-up question. Perhaps maybe I can point this at Julia. I think it's a really interesting story and a really interesting relationship. And I'm kind of really interested to know to what extent you knew where you were going with this at the start. Obviously, you had the imperative to change, to pivot. You had buy-in from the senior executives. You knew you had to go digital. But within that, digital is a big space. Did you know what you wanted to achieve, and how important was the partnership in actually establishing which direction to take?
Well, I think once we kind of moved away from our kind of shiny object, we were a little bit distracted. It was, a very tumultuous time. But once we kind of rebooted, we did know what we were after. We wanted to connect with people who found value in what the American Lung Association does. And I'm going to kind of reach back to some of Scott's comments, that they would have value with what we deliver, that they would keep coming back to us, and that they would tell other people about what a great job we do. And one of those stories was, and the narrative was really around COVID, and also how we were trying to break through the health disparities that were surrounding COVID. A lot of people didn't even know what was happening in that public health space. So as we were able to connect with these people in a measured, consistent way, we found that we were not only receiving more donations directly, but we were getting a little bit more of a following than we had counted on. So these are people who will come to us not just once, but they become part of the journey. They want our newsletter. They want to know what the next webinar is. They want to weigh in on our advocacy efforts. So those were like, the donation was the first point, but the journey that comes after that has been equally important to us.
No, I think that the continuity of the relationship is the core. It is at the core, because that following that you build is a lasting relationship. It goes for much longer. And so counting on the fact that everything can be event-based, single moment thing is just maybe a touch point. You have to think that there are so many touches that come after that. And I think that's really the important sort of learnings through this whole process. How do you carry that on forward?
Yeah, thanks, Seraj. Seraj touched upon this earlier, Julia. I guess the value of perseverance and of patience. I think he said, there are very few Cinderella stories in marketing, so it takes hard work. What have you learned about the value of perseverance, of test and learn, about continuous adaptability over that period?
Again, I'm amazed he asked me to be here because I am the least patient person I know. But that aside, it's true. There are some marketing vehicles that require patience and time. And I think as CMOs going into it, when we know which of these require time to optimize, that gets built in. And not everything works right off the bat. So many things come in, you have a hypothesis, you have whatever research ideas you have, and you start. And you can't be afraid to start. You have to start someplace with the best information you have, and then build in time to iterate. And when it's a programmatic campaign that needs to yield over a long period of time, being patient is really the foundation.
And Julia, how do you bring the rest of the organization, the rest of the C-suite with you? Perhaps they are maybe I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but occasionally people are a little bit more impatient when it comes to realizing and recognizing ROI than others. So how do you manage those expectations as part of this whole journey that you've been on?
Well, again, not to keep just relying on Scott, but he really did set us up well. We had this huge social experiment where everything was off the table and everything was new. And our old standbys were not available to us. We couldn't just have another gala. We couldn't just have another climb or another walk. So everyone kind of had to just get on board and give new things a try. Would everybody be as willing to do such new radical things in a normal year? Perhaps not. I mean, we had a completely new telethon, like a TV telethon, or a digital TV telethon. Things that like people in CMO positions like mine hadn't really done like that for years. But you had to find a new way. So I really appreciated the ability to reset. I wish it were under less extreme circumstances, of course. But it did it gave everyone permission to say, yeah, let's try it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Julia. Seraj, let's maybe get some thoughts from you on this, because obviously, there's quite a lot of pressure on you folks as one half of this partnership, this relationship, to deliver on that promise, on those expectations. So how have you approached that, holding up your end of the bargain, if you like?
I think, we are only as good as our client, frankly. I mean, and I've noticed that in many relationships that we have done over the years, the quality of the guidance we receive, the way they brief us and so forth have made a huge difference. And frankly, if you trust us, our team will rise to the occasion and try to do everything and anything that is in our hands and our control to really make it happen. And I think I wouldn't say that I didn't have sleepless nights. I did. Because behind the scenes, Julia was very clear to me in her messages to me. It's like, look, if this program doesn't deliver, this is going to be worse than chewing on glass. That was her words. And I was like, oh my God, we really have to do something here and figure out a way to really deliver the solution. So we were maniacally focused, and our team was absolutely there on call and available to really communicate frequently show exactly how progress was being made, show how changes were being made, how creative tweaks were being made, all of that. And I think communication transparency cannot be stated to be of more significance here. Very, very critical. And I appreciated the fact that Julia provided a lot of leadership on her side as well, available on call to really make a change. This is a two-way process, I can tell you that. I mean, I appreciate when the clients put the responsibility at our doorstep, but I think there is a partnership element that is key here.
So how did you, maybe a question to Julia, how did you kind of divide up the roles and responsibilities there about what you wanted to put in the hands of Seraj and his team, what you wanted to take on in-house yourself? How did you establish the rules of engagement, if you like?
Well, so much of that has to do with the makeup of a team. And probably everybody sitting out there is kind of calculating in their heads, how many people do they have on staff who can really help? So we have a small but mighty staff. So we really had 3 people on our team who provided Acuity with everything we could. Like, here's all of the data, here's all of the background on our current constituency. So really, we took on providing them everything that we know that could help make a better informed decision. And then we let them know, like, here is our range of assets, here's our mission statements, here's what we can do. So we really took like what we know best, which is our constituents and our clients, and connected it with Acuity and asked them to form the media, the communication, the pacing, the complete strategy to come up with the result we needed. So that was really kind of where the line was. And the other piece was just being always brutally honest. You can talk about unpleasant topics without being unpleasant, but you really have to get down to like, hey, this isn't trending this week, or this isn't happening, or this was our goal, but this is where we are. Having those conversations on a regular basis really produces better results. Because then you get those weeks where you're like, hey, look at this. This is working. Let's come up with our own little end zone dance just to cap off this, this week.
Many thanks, Julia. Many thanks. So listen, I'm going to take a quick pause now because we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So I think now is probably a good opportunity to get them involved. And our first question today comes from Victor over at ICP. Hi there, Victor.
Hello again.
Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for this talk. That's great. And love the examples of, I think, Julia, you mentioned how to both understand and recognize the fear and worry internally and that it's a real thing. And Seraj, you're saying, accept that things are not going to work, always succeed, and learn from those failures. Question, though, how, I know we spoke about how you manage up, right? And with the CEO or the CFO, where there's going to be a lot of pressure to succeed. But more specifically, how did you manage across? So, for example, there might be different functions in the organization. It might be a sales team that may not be in your reporting structure, and they might have entirely different KPIs for you, and they want results as well. So, to try to get them to be patient, but then also get them to endorse and support and be part of that culture shift when they're aligning to different metrics of success. How did you manage that?
No, that's a really great question, because there are stakeholders like obvious and implied within the organization. So it does start at the top. So once we decided as an organization, look, we needed to expand our fundraising channels. That became a little bit easier conversation just with the CEO. But then to get support through the rest of the C-suite, I first had to, before Seraj even came in, explain to them how we are going to approach it and which of the other members in our peer group already were being successful in this. Nobody wants to be the one who's left out. So it's really easier to show like, okay, so this major not-for-profit public health group is killing it in this area. And so are these 3 others, and we're not playing here. So by engaging the CEO and my partners in the C-suite in really the category, what we're trying to do. That was step one. Then step two was to bring in a partner to say, here is somebody who has been working in this space, and he and his team are going to come in. So I had Seraj present to my chief development officer, which in for-profit world is the head of sales. And I think my CFO was there as well, and Harold. And instead of hearing me talk about what is going to happen, it's best to just let your partner talk about it. And I've gotten caught in that before, where I try to explain it, where if I tell them if we share the strategic intent and then let the partner give the details, it's a much more productive conversation. And I find that people get on board much more quickly.
Thanks, Julia. Seraj, this feels like a good opportunity to bring you in. Yeah, well, what kind of levers did you use to bring the rest of the organization with you?
That was a very, very good point, actually. And I love the question, because it's all about how you and what do you base your argument on? How do you make the case, right? So the idea of going digital and doing it, the case was there because the catalyst was there with COVID and all of that, right? So that Julia talked about. But I think the added case and an argument that's necessary is like, what does $1 of investment really return us? That was really, and what's the proof point? Does anybody else in the category deliver 3x, 4x returns on $1? Does it happen? And I think those benchmarks that we had were truly the core premise on which the testing was set up. That, okay, the goal is to prove that we American Lung can also do that, like what is happening in nonprofits elsewhere. And I think once that happened, the case was clearly there. And Julia did it phenomenally. The way she managed the internal organization was beautiful. I mean, she just needed to point us to who we needed to speak with, and off we went.
Brilliant. Many thanks, guys. Victor, it's a brilliant question. Many thanks for asking it and teasing out those wonderful answers. Great to hear from you, Victor. So I think we have another question coming up from Clarissa over at OBI Creative. Hi there, Clarissa.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Great. How are you guys doing? Can you see us?
Great to see you. Well, great to hear from you, Clarissa. I can't see you at the moment. I don't know if you have a camera on your device that perhaps you could switch on and we can see you as well.
Yep, we're trying.
Okay.
Technology is always fun. You'd think long into this, we'd figure it out.
Well, you know, if there's one thing I've learned over doing this over the last few 18 months or whatever is prepare for everything. Clarissa, no problem. We'll work on your video. We'll work on the basis of your audio for now. So what is your question for the panel?
I really enjoyed this topic of conversation, and coming from the agency world, I think one of the most important parts that you hit on was that trust and patience between the two of you. And I know you spoke about the honesty and the conversations. So how did you really build that? So you spoke about, it was like chewing glass and there was all this disruption at the forefront of it, but you have to be able to have that trust and patience before you can say, okay, let's sit down, let's figure this out. So how did you two or your teams really get to that point where then you could have those honest conversations, say, okay, we trust you to pivot, reiterate, and then obviously you found success in that. But how did that foundation start?
Well, my memory of this is that I had worked with Seraj prior to American Lung Association. So he was used to like my bizarre and colorful language. So chewing on glass is one of those things. But we have worked on things before where it starts off small, and then as it's successful, you add a little bit more fuel to it. And I've always been drawn to organizations that have a purpose and are purpose driven. And Seraj has that bent to him also. So don't worry, Seraj. I'm not going to tell everybody that you're actually a good guy, but he's actually a good guy. So we have been drawn through some of these either campaigns or companies at the same time. And they weren't always really big programs. But what I had learned about Seraj is he actually does what he says he's going to do. And It sounds really simple, but to me, that's really valuable. So even when it doesn't turn out, or when it does, when you have a track record with someone who comes through on what they had committed to, I'm more likely to go back and continue very honest conversations with them.
Yeah, I think, Clarissa, if I may add, the trust and confidence, or what I call client conviction, comes over long periods of time of consistency in the way you speak, what you deliver, what you promise. That comes over time. And it's a painful process. It's a long process. I tell you, every client I work with right now, I have at least known them for 10 years. And they have seen consistency over time, and it just takes effort. They have to believe you not on the first meeting or the second meeting. It takes a while before they begin to see that you are genuine. You're going to do what you're promising, that your word has some value. And I think that's something that we all must practice in our profession. That's very important, as an integral part of the ethics and integrity of what we do. That's what builds the relationship and the trust, right?
Many thanks, sir. And just a quick follow-up on that. Obviously, you and Julia have had a long relationship, and you've been able to leverage that, which is wonderful. And I love the idea of building those trusted partnerships over time and leaning on each other. Any advice for how to approach new relationships? And are there any ways to, I guess, accelerate that trust between the partners when you're embarking on a new engagement?
Yeah, I think so. I'll start and I'll let Julia describe it further. I think she already hinted at that. The relationship should usually start with some really good tests, early tests. They can be small programs. With Julia, I've done very small programs. And I think it gives the client the feel for how you work. Those programs, the success of those programs is not as important as the personality, the people, the chemistry, the DNA of how the partner really thinks through, how they follow through, what is the strategic thought process they bring in, what kind of tools they bring into to make a difference to solve the problem. I think that's more critical. Once you have tested the partner through all of that with potentially a small program, then your conviction can build over time, right? It's like, I never expect a client in my first engagement to give me a few $1 million to really start a program. Never. As a matter of fact, if they give it, I walk away. I tell them I don't want it. You don't know us well enough. You need to get to know us. You need to see how we operate. And once you have the confidence, you know what, we can go places. And I think that's what Julia actually liked about the way we've operated over the past few years.
Yeah, Julia, a quick follow-up on that, and then we'll maybe wrap this up for time.
Yeah, so I've also learned a couple lessons being in digital from my IT partners, and they start with business requirements. And that it used to be for all of us like the creative brief, if you will. But whatever you want to call it, being very specific with a new partner about what it is you expect. Sometimes as marketers, we kind of have this gray area in our brain. That is not a good way to start a new relationship. Being very specific about the outcomes that you are anticipating helps you really to evaluate whether this new partnership is going to be a good one for you or not.
Great stuff. Julia, Seraj, a real pleasure talking to you this morning. Many thanks for sharing your thoughts. And great to hear that such fruitful partnerships can exist. Thank you so much for providing your thoughts and your lessons learned. Enjoy the rest of the summit, folks.
We're delighted to be there. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Appreciate it. Bye.